So the first message I will put to you when it comes to getting noticed enough to get booked is that all good things will take time. This didn't happen to me within a week. It didn't happen within a month. It largely took a good 6 months before the momentum began. And then once the momentum started, it has not stopped. It's certainly, the hard work I put in the beginning of this certainly did make life easier. So the framework that I built around this is all around the idea that, back in, what's happening there with my canvas? Sorry, let me just quickly refresh my screen, because sometimes Canva just does some weird things and does strange things with images when you're right in the middle of a presentation. Let's give that another crack. There we go. No funny things over the McDonald's cups. So my story when it comes to the being noticed and getting booked comes from back in 2016, when I was just given the heads up from my boss that some of the senior management were looking to replace me because they wanted someone younger, fresher, newer, and cheaper. And whilst that is utterly illegal, what they did it in such a way that they were just going to basically try and bait me into stuffing up so they could sack me if I didn't choose to go on my own, which is not a happy thing to do after 13 and a half years in one business. So what we did is that I sort of came up with a plan to exit more gracefully, given that I wasn't wanted there anymore, and to move into something that would be a little bit more mine, and go into not just another job, but go into a situation where I would have a bit more control over my future. One thing I'd learned is, after putting all my eggs in one basket and one job and one source of income for 13 and a half years, I was never going to do that again. So it started off really at a McDonald's restaurant in Oxenford on the Gold Coast in Queensland, where I held my very first workshop. Now, I was supposed to be booked out into a party room. Then I turned up to the restaurant and discovered they don't have a party room, even though their website allowed me to book the party room. They confirmed the booking of the party room, but they didn't actually have a party room to book into. So being a rather cool winter night, I was then left to be able to go outside because the restaurant inside was too busy and too noisy. So outside onto a big concrete table, and I gathered with myself and what I was hoping was going to be 12 different people who had booked for this particular workshop to learn more about Facebook marketing and advertising, which at the moment in 2016 was still very much in its infancy. And then only 3 people turned up. Of those 3 people, 2 went on to become clients, which wasn't really what I was planning for. I wasn't expecting anyone to do that, but was very pleased. That gave me then the momentum to move forward to do more. So by offering that actionable knowledge on Facebook that I did for free showed my credibility. It showed at least 2 of those 3 people that I knew what I was talking about, and I was worth then exploring to do more stuff and be paid for it. So that offering of actionable knowledge, read that again, for free shows credibility. And that's what we're looking at. So not everyone can learn from a YouTube video. Not everyone learns effectively from a Google search either, because they don't quite know what they're looking for necessarily, or sometimes don't know what questions to ask. It's not just as simple as going Facebook marketing, because all you'll get is a whole lot of coaches who want to charge you $350 an hour to sit down with them to learn about how to do Facebook marketing from something that they weren't even accredited to do. Now, I wasn't to know that 2 years later after that, I actually be inducted into being a contractor with Facebook Australia and New Zealand themselves to be able to deliver training. But at that stage, I didn't have that credibility. All I had to do is show my knowledge to people in a group setting, and enough to be able to convince them that I'm worth working with. Now, that is the ideal situation where I'd sit down, 3 people would turn up, 2 would become clients, but that's definitely not what usually happens. People like to learn in person. Now, I know the pandemic kind of messed this up for us, but people do like to learn in person because some fears about learning are very, very personal. Some fears about systems and digital systems in particular are very, very personal and require some personal touch and a lot of empathy and a lot of encouragement to move past those fears. So what people will look for is not necessarily the answers always through a YouTube video or through a blog, but often they'll do it as a guide. They're looking for a guide to help them through there. So if they don't know where they're going and what they're doing, they can talk to someone who does, and that knowledge then gets transferred across to that person. But the guide needs a certain characteristics. A guide can't just be someone who just goes, go here, do that. They've got to have a certain amount of empathy and a certain amount of credibility. So how does this work? Well, the guide is kind of like Dumbledore in the Harry Potter movies. So you think of Dumbledore being the wise old sage, the wizard, and Harry, the boy wizard, who's gradually becoming more powerful and moving into more of who he is and what he's meant to be. Empathy is about kindness, interest, and knowledge of Harry's circumstances. So Dumbledore expressed those things. He expressed kindness, he expressed some interest in Harry as a person, and he knew some of the knowledge of what Harry's circumstances of his birth, the loss of his parents, all of that, what that was about. So he had some empathy already for Harry that he could relate to him. But you can't just operate on kindness alone. It can't sit on its own. Kindness works best when it's a part of a suite of activities and behaviors that you do. So Dumbledore couldn't just be a kind person who has an interest in Harry. He has to be also have the credibility of being one of the most powerful wizards in the world. He has the credibility of running the wizard school at Hogwarts. He's wise from a lifetime of working with magic and overcoming lots of obstacles and heartbreaks and things like that. So that's when we look at that, we go, well, this is where we're at. Not just kindness, but also the credibility to back that kindness up. So you as a guide build empathy by listening well, by being a very good listener, by being someone who is able to write in such a way that people will feel like they're connected to you, in a way that they feel like they have an ability to relate to what you're saying. That can come from you basically writing things on social media posts, in blogs, in delivering things in webinars even, that someone can go, that's me. I feel that. I understand that. Great. You get me. And that you get me moment is so powerful, especially when people are looking for solutions for big problems. Like if you're someone who's a tax advisor, or if you're a lawyer, there's not just the thing that you're a lawyer, but people walk in because they're afraid of lawyers. They know that lawyers cost a lot of money, and they go, well, how can I feel better about this? And that's where empathy comes in. Empathy is also the ability for you to answer big questions when they're asked, because some of the questions that people ask are absolute whoppers. They are so hard to answer, and they are so much is riding on your answer that they will go, well, I don't really know quite what I'm going to answer in this. But you'll sit there going, I need to answer this. Empathy looks at that and goes, well, that is a big question, and I really want to answer that. I may not be able to answer it, but I can express to you that my desire to answer it is really legitimate and really authentic. But credibility is less of those softer skills. We call them soft skills, but there's nothing soft about them. Credibility is more about the learning you've done, the portfolio you've built, the case studies that you can refer back to. So whilst empathy is all about listening, expressing your understanding of a client or a customer's situation, and then being able to answer their questions to the best of your ability, credibility is more about those things you've done before that you can prove that you are to be trusted. Credibility comes from that know, like, trust factor, where we don't trust anyone, trust someone until we like them. We don't like them till we know them. There's a very defined process of going through when it comes to humans connecting. And one of the ways you can do that is through workshops. And you think, well, what could I do a workshop in? Well, workshops come from you sharing your knowledge with people, and it doesn't have to be in a hotel convention center. It doesn't have to be in your own home. You can host these things in public library meeting rooms. They're usually free to hire, don't cost anything. They're even open on Saturdays. So public libraries are a resource that's so underutilized in Australia that we can use those as businesses. We don't have to be not-for-profit to do it. You can actually be a business and make use of a public library. Other places such as community centers. So you can go to community centers, which then allow you to be able to use a community space. It might require a deposit. It may not require anything at all. If you're a member of the community, you might just have to clean up after yourself. So that's another example of where you can access free or very low cost space to hold these workshops in. And then you can do an Airbnb. I saw a great example of this where somebody who I recently did a 13-person workshop with, they actually held the 13-person workshop in an Airbnb room, like an Airbnb house. And they went to that house, and the house had a great big a kitchen table where they were able to put 13 chairs around it that were in the house. They had a kitchen, they could prepare food, they had access to clean toilets. They even stayed there on the weekends just so they can get some great value out of it, rather than just doing this 2-day get together. People could go and sit and socialize, walk outside in the gardens, look at the view outside the backyard. It was a beautiful way of hosting that. And it ended up being, as an Airbnb, way, way cheaper than renting any sort of hotel conference room or any sort of, paid convention center room. But then you go, well, in today's life, do we really need to do in person at all when most of the things we're doing are online? This very webinar we're on now is an example of that. So online events are kind of the antidote to only being known in your local market. So if you want to be not as limited to your local market and holding those, and you want to go a bit further, then online events or webinars are a really good way of making that happen. And they also help you to get known in a much bigger place and bigger world than just where you live. An example was when I went to the Tropical Innovation Festival in Cairns earlier this year. I don't live in Cairns. I haven't visited Cairns in a couple of years. I go there for holidays sometimes. But what I had done prior to being invited to that particular conference is that I had worked, I've done a bit of a tour. So when I was in 2019, before the pandemic, I set up, it would have been 2020. I set up a series of places I wanted to go to. I traveled from Cairns to Townsville to Mackay to Bundaberg. And what I did was booked in a big workshop series of, a half-a-day workshop with different people in different towns to be able to showcase what I was able to do and to introduce them to this particular program. So I went to Cairns and had a really good number of people coming in. Actually, around about 50 people turned up to that particular workshop I did. Townsville had about 30 people turn up. So really good turnout. So really happy with that. Got to Mackay and there was like 3 people. Got to Bundaberg and there was 2. So it was a very, very different thing once I got to certain towns. But what I did do is after that tour, I followed up with people in Cairns and Townsville to see if they were interested in doing some very specific work remotely with me rather than in Mackay and Bundaberg, because in Mackay and Bundaberg, just the numbers weren't there to really make it worth my while. So I went, okay, Cairns and Townsville, let's work together a bit more on that. And from that, I managed to get a lot of one-to-one consultations. I got a lot more people into my webinars as well, because I was able to ask those people what they liked, what they wanted, what they did. What I didn't realize is that this then led to an invitation to a North Queensland Innovation Festival. So I did all this follow-up with very specific classes I did for each market. So it's an online class that I did specifically for Cairns, and an online class I did specifically for Townsville. Those classes had over 50 people attending them. So what happened is that now 50 people plus the people who actually met me, so another 50, 100 in Cairns and about 70 to 80 in Townsville, now knew who I was and had talked about me, so that when I was invited to the Tropical Innovation Festival, I had this feedback from the organizers saying, we've got a lot of people who are really excited to see you. And I was like, why would a bunch of people in Cairns be excited to see me? How do they even know me? What I've forgotten, of course, is that I'd done all this prior work to get known, so that when it came to booking out my sessions, I had nice full sessions with plenty of people in there, lots of questions, and it was a really good experience. So it just shows you that a little bit of work you've done maybe a year or 2 prior can make a really big difference to what you're doing in 2022. So when I did this in early this year, it was completely different to what I would have done if I had just turned up as an unknown quantity. I'd done some work in that market first, so that when I did return, I was a known quantity. I wasn't just a random person showing up to do a workshop. But we had a big attitude change during the pandemic. So that's changed a lot of the in-person stuff to being, well, we can't really do the in-person stuff. We have to do this this stuff where we're going to work only in our own spaces. We're wearing masks, all that kind of thing. The big change we had, though, is that I couldn't never get anyone into a webinar. We had this sort of a KPI as part of this program early on that was telling us that we had to get a certain amount of people in the webinars, certain amount of people in the workshops. And that was great. So getting in the workshops before 2020 was really easy. You would fill up workshops, you do one a week, it'd be great, get tons of people in. But webinars, couldn't get a single person to book them, not a single person. That was all until the pandemic happened. And then all of a sudden, we couldn't do in-person workshops. We could only do Zoom workshops. And then those Zoom workshops filled up really quickly. But the other thing this allowed us to do is to invite people to join us from all over the world. So no longer was it a case of going, well, you know, too bad, we can't reach anywhere, so we can't sell to anyone elsewhere in the world. Now what we found is that, yeah, actually we could. And it was actually remarkably easy to do it, because all we really were doing was doing the same thing, but on a digital platform to reach more people, which then opens up markets for people like you who are looking to maybe not just serve your local population, but people beyond you. But you've got to understand that these webinars, they're not about your offer. They're about what your expertise is. So your offer is not the draw card. The draw card is not to get this discount code to go and do this with your particular product, or to book you in for a special price that's only available for today. Those kind of things are just very sales oriented. And what happens, because the main event is your sale that you're trying to do, then everything in that particular webinar becomes about that sale. And then the value that people are looking for to walk away with isn't there, because they just know that at some point they're going to be pitched something. What they're really there for is your expertise. But what's the point if you can't sell something? You're a business. You still need to be able to get someone to buy something from you at some stage. And then this then leads into what we use these things for. So the pattern of getting people from free stuff that you're giving them openly and very easily into then long format stuff is because we want them to not just like us and notice us on social media, but we want them then to trust us because of the long format stuff we're doing. Long format stuff is what people trust. It shows expertise. So a 1 hour webinar will show a lot more expertise and show that I know what I'm talking about a lot better way than, for instance, a 50-word tweet. It's just not the same kind of trust factor. You're not going into enough detail for people to go, yeah, she really knows what she's talking about. It takes us through that know, like, trust process. They get to know you firstly through social media. By repeatedly seeing your social media, they might start to like you, but they're not going to trust you until they can see some really good examples of the work you do and the kind of expertise and experience you have in that work. So the example would be, you would produce something which is a social media post which introduces an idea. That idea could be, let's just say, the idea is that starting your own business helps you to become more independent, work from comfortable spaces that you have control of, and never have to do the 1 hour each way commute ever again. But whilst that's very, very nice sounding and very, very convincing, I don't really want to go and make that happen until I can trust that it's going to work for me. So to get that trust, I'd have to lead from that social media post over to a blog post or a video, or maybe it's a webinar or a podcast episode, even something that goes into more detail that says more than you should start a new business and quit your job. That's a big lifestyle change to make without explaining some of the complexities and some of the deeper advantages to doing so. And those deeper advantages then come from working with, reading more about you in the blog, seeing more about you in the video, listening to more about you and what you do and what your recommendations and what your expertise in this area is through a podcast. And to do this, you can use things like my particular stack I use to do a live webinar is to do Zoom, which we're on right now, using Canva as my presentation software, because it's a heck of a lot easier to work with than PowerPoint, and it doesn't take up as much of the screen space. For instance, I've got a screen up here that's got my PowerPoint on it that I can read. I've got all my controls for Zoom down on this screen. I just need the two. But with PowerPoint, it takes over the entire screen. You can't see anything else but your presentation, which means I can't see if questions are being asked on Zoom at all. Whereas when you're doing the Canva presentation, you only need the one screen. You can all see everything else on the other screen. And Humanitix is the ticketing system that I use for a lot of my private stuff. Two reasons why I use it. It's free to use if you've got free events. If you want to take payment, the fees are quite low, and the booking fees are donated to various education initiatives for underprivileged children. So for scholarships for remote Indigenous Australian students who need to be able to go a long way to get their further education, and then also to supporting the education of girls in developing nations, particularly in the Philippines, in a place like Vietnam and Laos. So there's lots of reasons why you would use Humanitix instead of Eventbrite. That's one of the reasons. It doesn't have, I guess, the people will go to Eventbrite to see what's on sometimes. You don't really get that with Humanitix quite as much. But at the same time, in realistic terms, how many people go to Eventbrite to check out what's on in their town anyway? We really get that from Facebook or LinkedIn or places like that, right? I also use a thing called Restream. Restream allows me to send out a live stream to not just Facebook, but also LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter all at the same time. Unfortunately, it doesn't support Instagram just yet. Hopefully one day that will be the case. But for now, it's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and a couple of other like not so well-known platforms that are more about gaming and reaction and watch party kind of videos. But for the sake of business, it's great to be able to get to all 4 of these particular platforms all at once. So instead of just getting 3 people watching on Facebook, 2 people watching on LinkedIn, half a dozen on YouTube, I'm getting a collection of a whole lot more people to be able to watch through that way. So to doing that sort of thing, to getting that sort of attention, getting noticed and getting booked, this is valuable because it gets you onto the platforms where people actually are. Not everyone can sit down and watch for an hour, but all these platforms record it. So in the case of Twitter, it records the video, inserts it as a tweet. On YouTube, it becomes one of my collection of live videos that will show in my YouTube channel. On LinkedIn, it becomes a LinkedIn post and of course is attached to the event in LinkedIn where I first advertised this on there. And at Facebook, same thing. A live event is recorded in there, it becomes part of your profile or part of your business page so that anyone can go and watch that later on as well. So what next? What do we do next? We need to then have somewhere to get people out of those social platforms and get their information as something you can use. So you want to draw people into a mail list. My mail list now is over 10,000 people. That at the beginning of the year was 150 email addresses. That's how much it's grown this year because I've been able to draw people into that mailing list. That mailing list now represents the #1 source of my private work. And from 10,000 people in there who seem to be very engaged. Like we've got between 30 and 40% open rates, which is great for 10,000 people. I'm very, very happy with that. And it represents, like I said, the highest proportion of new work I get. That's where we can also start to produce an offer. We can send someone off to an offer. So at the end of all that, even though it's not about the offer, we can send them off to a place where they can get a special offer. Hey, you can download this ebook. Hey, you can read this particular blog post that explains more about what I'm talking about. And plus I've got a discount code for a particular piece of software that might be helpful. Like for instance, when I want to work with people to say, use this particular tool, I say, and you can get it through this link here, which will get you $10 off. So for instance, in the case of AppSumo, a $10 discount on a $39 piece of software is quite significant. That's a third off almost, well, just over a third off. So, but then I'm also getting $10 of value in that myself. So it's worthwhile for me as an affiliate, but also worthwhile for them because it gives them an offer that really is too good to refuse. But then you've also not just got to have somewhere to collect their email addresses and somewhere to send them to give them an offer. You've got to have somewhere to give them more of anything. So for everything you can do on social media, even at the webinar or a podcast, always have somewhere else to send people. Once I sign off on my podcast, I always say at the end of it, before I say my outgoing, which is, now it's time to get back to work to help your business to get known, get found, and stay known. Before all that, I say, right, you can read this particular blog, which is on my website. Just go to free guides and see the article all about choosing the right audience on Instagram. And then they'll know to go somewhere else to get a bit more information on something I've been talking about, or at least I'm sending them somewhere where they can have a continued relationship with me other than just this one moment in time on a webinar. Can you charge for these things, for these workshops and events? Absolutely you can. Yeah. Absolutely, it can. In fact, tier it. So you've got elementary information going out for free, intermediate information going out at low cost, and really advanced deep dive stuff that you're doing at a premium. Free for the basics, a little cost for something intermediate, but once you get to the really powerful stuff, then don't be afraid to charge a powerful price for it too. This is your intellectual property, and this is the stuff that you have been working for years on. Some quick tips for when you're putting together presentations for either workshops or for webinars. Try to have no more than 3 major ideas that you cover off in each hour. Have no more than maybe 3 points on each screen, because people that I've got like 5 here, but I've made it so it's not too crowded, but 3 is perfect. Using nothing smaller than a 30-point font. You'll notice that I've made all my letters are really, really big, except I spelled fonts wrong there. But also set some expectations for what's going to happen later in the webinar. So this is why at the very beginning, I say, this is what we're going to cover. What I noticed when I said, this is what we're going to cover, one of the people who had signed in for this webinar signed straight out after that. They didn't see anything in there they wanted to cover. So they went, oh, well, I'll go off. I might watch this in the recording later. All the other people stayed in. So thank you for staying in. I really appreciate it. What we're doing in these is showing expertise and getting attention. And this is where we flick over to beyond our own social media activities, or beyond our webinars and workshops. We go into what is the stuff we use that's going to show our expertise. And an optimized website is one of the things we'll do that. This is a particular layout of website I'm going to show you that's around the certified story brand guidance that I do. And this is designing a website in a story brand compliant way. Why we do that? Well, because they're far more effective when a website is laid out in a way that takes people on a journey, especially if you're selling a big ticket item that doesn't cost just $5. You want to, you've got it's a service or it's a product which is actually quite pricey. People need to be led into that. They're not just going to be dumb and say, it's $1,200, buy now. No one's going to do that, because no one's sitting there waiting with their credit card prime ready to give you $1,200. You need to bring them on a journey with that. And there's a bit of storytelling to be told. Starts off with the header of the website, which has one very clear statement that says, this is why you should care about what we do. And it usually answers a question, the big question that someone has about why they're even looking at your website. There should be an easy call to action that's right there. So we've got schedule a call in this example mock-up, and the pitch can be something that's related to what you do, or it could be you yourself if you are your brand. The key here is not to cram too much in. There is a very strong opening statement, perhaps a subheading that's got a little more information, but you can have that call to action. 1 is perfect, 2 is okay, 3 is starting to get a bit long in the tooth. You don't want too many actions, because you just want to lead people to where you want to lead them to, the ultimate thing, which is that call. Next, underneath the header, you then have what we call the value stack, where there's 3 things that people can expect when they deal with your business, the successful outcomes that they're looking for. So for instance, if we're looking at someone who is a life coach, you could say that the success factors that you want to list here could be have more power in your life, achieve more with money, and 3, attract the relationships you want. They are 3 outcomes that you might have, as a life coach, being able to see that's what you want to do. So that's what you list. It's showing that this is a process they can go through. The value they're going to get out of working with you is these 3 things specifically. We move then onto the stakes, and the stakes are where we go, okay, do you have these struggles? Is this what you are here to solve? So we go problem number 1 through to problem number 4. You can have 10 problems. I've got about 10 listed on my website, where I just go, are you someone who fails to get any momentum on social media? Are you finding you can't tell the story of your business very well? Do you find that you're spending tons of money on Facebook but getting nowhere? And at some point in those problems you list, your customer will see their problem listed and they'll go, that's me. That's me. That's who I want to work with, someone who addresses that. After the stakes, then it moves down. We create what is called the value proposition. This is what your services or your key products are. So it could be service number 1, could be one-to-one coaching for people who need that personal attention. Second one could be group sessions to learn with others and accelerate the pace of your learning. Number 3 could be join our Facebook group, which is free and allows you to tap into the knowledge of ourselves and all of our partners. So that value proposition gives people the expectation of what it is that you actually do. You haven't done any pricing yet. All you're doing is just introducing to them, this is what we do to solve your problem. The guide section then talks about how you can, we're talking about the empathy and the credibility. This is where this goes. So the empathy is like, we get it. Changing your life can be hard. There's so many things you need to consider, and it feels like everyone's got different answers. We have a specific 3-point program we can take you through, which 96% of our participants have said was profoundly changing their lives. Schedule a call. So that's where you can go. The that there's an empathy, because you're going, we know it's hard to change things. We know it's hard to be able to afford this. Then we back up that empathy with the credibility that I was saying before. Over on the right, we can have anything from your memberships to your certifications to testimonials and case studies from different customers who've worked with you before. Your pricing and packaging then becomes something where you go, okay, what I'm doing here is ensuring that I've got the ability to be able to express my pricing and what you're going to get for that pricing. It doesn't have to be the full set of features. In fact, you don't have to have this section at all. This is the one optional section on a StoryBrand site, because some people have very highly customizable services and products which you cannot price because the variables in pricing are far too broad. You will notice though that after all these sections, there's a schedule a call button. It appears in all of them. And this is because we want to be able to give people an opportunity to hop off and get that call done, or to send a message or join something as often as you can. You don't want to need to hold that back until the very end. You can make it so they can do this at any point they like. Excuse me. Next is the plan. And the plan is possibly the most clear and important part of your new website. This is going to show you the steps that someone goes through to work with you. So step one could be book your, click this link to book your discovery call so we can work out how we can work together. Secondly, could be after we work together, we'll send you a plan and a proposal that that you can consider to see if we should work together. Number three, once you accept our plan and proposal, then we schedule in your first call and we get underway. That's a really clear thing. And I usually use the story of the catering. I first did a catering for an event of 150 people. It was in Darwin. I didn't know how to do catering. I'd never catered anything. Catering for me was like a bowl of chips and a bit of dip, and that'd be about it. Maybe some chopped up cheese and cabanossi and Jats crackers. That was about the limits of my catering experience. So what I would do is go looking for catering in Darwin. Who does catering in Darwin? And then there's tons of like restaurants and cafes would come up and say, oh, we do catering. And that's all I had. We do catering. Call us to understand more. I was doing this on my lunch break at the time, so I couldn't call anyone because otherwise I'll be calling these restaurants in the middle of their lunch break. And the last thing they need to do is talk to someone about an inquiry to do with catering in the middle of their busiest period of the day, right? So I kind of was stuck. I couldn't do anything. I needed to get some information and some clarity really quickly. Eventually landed on the Subway website, where the catering leads you to literally a guide through how to do catering with Subway. So that next day when I had the event, 150 people, well, it's not that next day, it was like next week, 150 people got to eat a whole lot of Subway, a whole lot of wraps, and a whole lot of gooey cookies. So that's because Subway made it easy for me. They had a plan just like that. Step one, step two, step three. Everyone else was just like, call us. I'm like, oh, I can't call you. It's to just tell me how to do it. It's all I want sometimes. Don't make me call you. Tell me what I need to do. An explanatory paragraph then is going to a lot more depth about what your business does. And this is primarily for things like search engine optimization, where you want to get your keywords in there for what people are searching for. So it's abundantly clear what it is your products and services are, and a bit about yourself in there as well. And finally, we get down to the lead magnet, which is almost at the bottom of the page. This is that thing that says, join our newsletter that comes out every Saturday and delivers incredible value, or send us your email address and we'll send you back a free ebook. Things like that. They're like I call a transitional call to action. They're not quite the commitment of doing the call or doing the discovery call or booking time with you. It's that first step where they go, I'll download this extra piece of value here, and I'll think about, after I've had a read this, that I'll feel a bit more confident about booking some time with that person. At the very bottom of the page, what we call the junk drawer. So all the links that go to everything else that's on your site. So your privacy statement, your terms of service, your contact page, all those things that kind of like very secondary pages. Even your about page doesn't need to be there. What you'll notice is if I go right to the top into the heading again, to the header, you'll notice that they've only got 2 links at the very top: download the free guide and schedule a call. You want to make the top of your website as uncluttered as possible, because they really need to get to something, and very few people ever need to do, to get down to your privacy policy or to your pricing or anything like that. They can just go straight down the bottom and do it from there in the junk drawer, where you can go to all those different places. So next, after we look at fixing out the website, we have to look at optimize social media. And we optimize our social media. And I'm going to trigger a few people here on this call if they might find this a little bit triggering and they go, oh my God, this might be a really, really big truth bomb, but social media is a terrible place for selling products and services. Absolutely is. It's a terrible place to do selling. The reason is because what people want out of social media is relevant news from the relevant people in their lives, or photos and videos of the things they're interested in, or entertainment they can relate to and enjoy, or a little bit of a giggle and a bit of a thrill on a busy work day by watching a video. That's not what we want to do, though. As business owners, what we want is to share our valuable message with the world, get people interested in what we're selling, sell more of what we want to sell, and get people to talk about what we sell. You can see the mismatch there. What people want out of social media and what businesses want out of social media, completely different things, which makes social media a terrible platform to sell things on. So what is the point of social media? Why would we even bother about it? What is it actually good for? Social media is good for building that relationship that moves from knowing you to liking you to trusting you. So we use that as a bit of a funnel, I suppose, a bit of a customer journey where we go from, needing to get attention. And this is how we go from that know, like to trust by getting some attention, you being memorable on social media and encouraging relationship with you. So I'll break that down a bit. For getting attention, we're talking about making sure your creative is eye-catching, making sure it's like, video is best. We all know that video is the best thing to do. But if you're not great at video, make sure at least that your graphic is really eye-catching. It's not full of words. It has a bit of text in it, maybe like a prompting word, but don't fill out all the bits of information. I was advising a client last week who advertised a lot of events. And what they do, they put every detail about the event in their graphic. They kind of use their graphic on social media almost like a flyer. So it's like, they've ignored the fact that they can put all the detail in the caption of the image. All they need in the image is, this is what it is, this is when it's on. The rest of the details, all the sponsors and all that sort of rubbish can go into the caption. You can take care of all that in there. So the getting of attention is absolutely vital. You do it through really good use of photos and videos, then have a really catchy hook of a headline. And I'm not talking about just something like save 20% off this weekend, or it's Black Friday, time to save. If every ad and every post that I saw over the Black Friday period saying it's Black Friday, that seemed to be the most creative thing that anyone could say about Black Friday, was that it's Black Friday. There's so much better they could have done with that. And they just didn't. They just went, it's Black Friday. So that hook and that headline, those first words that people see, have to drag you in. And they drag you in not by tricking you and not trying to pretend that it's something better than what it is. What you've got to do is start off with a benefit, the benefit of why someone will bother clicking on the link in that. Why should they follow that link? Why should they even bother reading the rest of the post? That should be summed up in that first line. So if you're a life coach, instead of saying, ever wanted to get the most out of life, what you would do is attack the problem that someone's having. If you're burned out and you're sick of your job, then we need to talk. That's a headline, because it's talking to the person about the very problem they've got right now. And then we consider the placement. Where are we going to put our message? So we're going to go to Facebook, YouTube, Instagram Reels, TikTok. Where do we want to put that? So we're going to get that attention. So getting attention is the first step. Then we need to be memorable. People are memorable, and we're talking about that businesses are just people as well. Being memorable comes from listening more. It comes from being a storyteller. It comes from showing kindness. It's the humanity of what you're doing that leads to this. So if we say, okay, if you're being memorable, people are remembered when they are listeners. When someone will sit there and not try to butt in and lead the conversation and be the main event in your story, then you tend to remember them. We like people who listen because we feel like we're heard and understood, and we feel like they get us. And that's a really beautiful place to be in. And so, yeah, we try to do more of that. Then we try to be a storyteller. Storytellers are perhaps the best people to meet with, because they're able to connect your problem with a story of how someone else overcame it. And because storytelling is built into our DNA, that we've always been storytellers, sharing stories around the campfire, sharing stories in women's circles and in men's circles. It's a much more effective way of communicating meaning than just words written down on paper alone. It's why, for instance, our Indigenous Australians, rather than writing, actually pass down the stories, because the truths and the parables for living and the advice for living and even the knowledge was all passed down through stories, because stories are remembered better than words are. Facts are lost really quickly, but the stories will always remain. I don't remember much about my grandmother. She died when I was quite young. I don't really remember, things like, the words she said, except I remember the stories she told about her childhood. So my grandmother, the memory of her for me is locked in the stories that she used to tell us about, when she, was trying to pick the neighbor's custard apples and take them home, or when she went to the shop and had to buy some eggs and sugar and end up buying a little ornamental bird cage instead, and she got into a lot of trouble. I remember these stories despite the fact that they were told when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. That's the power of storytelling, as opposed to the power of facts and figures. People don't make decisions on big ticket things because of facts and figures. They make decisions because they feel emotionally connected with that potential solution to a problem they have in their lives. And of course, we remember those who are kind to us. We really do. I remember, a time when there's a little bit of an overshare here, but I was living on the streets at one point, very early in my university journey. And by living on the streets, I sort of, it's only for a short period, maybe about, 2-3 months, where I was sort of couch surfing and sleeping in places that weren't safe. That I was shown a lot of kindness by members of the Salvation Army. And I still remember the names. Betty Sue was one of them. John Davidson was his name, was one of the other guys. I remember them so vividly because they showed me kindness. That kindness made them memorable. The stories that my grandmother told me made her memorable. And the people who have listened to my stories, who have been there when I've had an issue to share, and they've really listened and not tried to butt in and try to solve the problems for me when all I needed to be listened to, they're the people who are memorable. That's how a business becomes memorable as well. And then you also encourage relationship. What you're wanting to do is, and this could be almost going on a date, to be honest. You start with, if it's someone who you're meeting for the first time or coming across for the first time, you start with something that's empathetic, not just with a, hey, how are you? Which is what we usually do because we don't know what to say. It's lazy, it's easy. Hey, how are you? We do it when we talk to the checkout operator at the supermarket. They'll go, hey, how are you doing? And you just say, oh, good, thanks. And it stops, because it's a social construct that we don't care about how the other person's doing, really. The difference is in here, when it's a client, you do care. So instead of starting off with, hey, how are you? I'd start off with, oh, Brisbane, eh? Yeah, it's a bloody hot day there today, isn't it? And that's something that someone opened up in a previous call to this, was he was from Mackay, and he said, oh, here you guys in Darwin are having an absolute stinker up there today. And I was like, huh, that's really nice of you to actually know that. And it just immediately built up a really nice rapport. Then we get to the shared interests. That's when we're talking about the ability to be able to go between the ability to be able to find common ground. So we've both got a common interest in sustainability. We can talk about sustainability. That builds a rapport and a relationship with us. But it also then leads us through to a very vital part of when we're encouraging relationship. And that's to take a next step. And a next step is always going to be something like, okay, hey, do you want to grab a coffee after this so we can keep talking about that? Or, hey, do you want to make an appointment with my secretary and we'll actually catch up and actually really nut out this issue and how we might be able to overcome it. You're always, as a business, particularly if you're a sole trader, looking for the ability to take people to that next step, to that next level. Which brings me to networking, which is probably the most awkward thing any of us will always do. And I used to hate it, and I still struggle with it some days, but I've come to learn that it's actually a very vital part of what I do as a business owner. It's also a very enjoyable part of what I do as a business owner, because I've stopped hating it and started actually leaning into what it is actually for, because you do not find customers at networking events. I know it sounds weird, but your customers probably aren't there. My customers are never at networking events, because there's a bit of a circle theory here. In the circles of networking, you start with the people you meet at a networking event. They represent this tiny little core at the center of the circles, but they know people. And those people they know also know people. Your customers aren't in that light blue circle at the event. Your customers are the people that are known by the people at the event. So the people at the event, they're not your customers. They're your fans or your advocates, which is why networks like BNI, if you've ever come across that before, are so successful, because it's not focused on getting people within the chapter or the BNI network to buy your stuff. It's about telling them so clearly and understanding that they understand exactly what it is you do so much that when conversations come up and someone says, you know what, I could really use someone to come over and give me a great quote to get this garden fixed up once and for all. And then the person says, I know a guy, or I know a woman who does this. I know a family business that does this. Do you want me to hook you up? And they're like, yeah, that'd be amazing. It'd save me having to look around for everybody. And then what happens is a connection's made, a sale is then conducted, a transaction is made, and it all came down to the fact that you went to a networking event and adequately explained what your name and business name are, what your business does, who your ideal customer is, and why your ideal customer should give a damn about what you do. What's in it for them? What is the thing that's so important for them to know? So that one's worth writing down or screenshotting or taking a photo of. That when you meet people, to be very clear on what you can say to them. You say, my name is Dante St. James. My business is Business Station. What we do is help small businesses to be able to get off the ground and running as cheaply as possible so that they've got enough money to be able to grow faster later on. Our ideal customer is maybe someone who's at the very beginning of their journey. They haven't put all the things in place yet. They haven't made all the mistakes yet. And why they should care about that is because we've done this with so many people that we really help them to save money and stop wasting on things that potentially are no good for them. That's a really simple, like, I know that sounded like it wasn't simple, but I was able to roll that off my tongue because I just need to know then to remember what my name and business name is, what my business does, who my ideal customer is, and why that customer will care. We then move on to the networking that occurs online, and a lot of this occurs on LinkedIn. I want to introduce you to something called the LinkedIn Social Selling Index. Just Google that, LinkedIn Social Selling Index. If you're logged into LinkedIn at the moment, it will then give you your social selling index. I'm currently sitting on 72 out of 100. I dropped down to 71 last week. I'm back up to 72 this week. And what it's telling me is that out of the things I'm doing, it's telling me that within my industry, I'm in the top 1% of people who are very good at operating in the network of LinkedIn. But within my network, I'm in the top 2%. So I've actually dropped. I used to be in the top 1% of my network as well. I was up to 74 out of 100. So the components of that score are broken down to how good I am at establishing my personal brand. I'm pretty good at that. I used to be 25. It's dropped down a bit lately. So I need to return a bit more onto that. Finding the right people is something I do not do well. What I did earlier this year, I just connected to tons and tons of people and just thought that's the way to do LinkedIn. Connect to as many people as you possibly can. I've now learned that's the worst thing I could have done because it's put a whole lot of utterly irrelevant people in my feed, a whole lot of utterly irrelevant people into my connections. So I'm now going through a process of reducing down my following to about a third of what it is now, which sounds like a stupid thing to do, but it's not. What I want is less people who are more interested in what I'm doing, who are more likely to people who are going to remember me. I want to be memorable to them so they can tell other people what I do and they are able to recommend those people to me. Engaging with the insights is going in and looking at how each post is performing and saying, oh yeah, this post did really well, but that post didn't do well. What's the difference? What's the patterns I can see? And also, who are the people who are seeing it? Am I really just like shooting arrows into the wrong target here? Or am I, doing something which is a bit more together and real and effective? And also the building relationships. I'm very good at building the relationships because I'm commenting on people's stuff all the time. I'm engaging in conversations in private messages all the time. I get a 25 out of 25 for that, but I need some very big improvement in the area of engaging with insights and finding the right people. And I can break those things down where it says, okay, here's the top demographics of people who I've reached in the last 28 days. Last 28 days, out of the 15,000 people I've reached, 22 of them were founders, Managing directors were 16. So I start to see that C-suite people who run their own businesses, tend to be what the highest amount of people are. Now that's out of that's not out of 15,000, it's out of 5,000. So 22 people out of 5,000 isn't exactly something I go, that's trend setting. It's a very small amount of people. So I'll leave that one out, but the locations are very telling. The demographics of the people I'm reaching tend to be in the Darwin metropolitan area. Usually Brisbane comes up next, but in that particular calling, I got Perth. I had a good week in Perth because I did a lot of things with people in Perth. And then we move on to the other areas where I'm kind of having an impact. And it's always the big cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Gold Coast even. So that then tells me that, okay, considering that most of the people who are getting reached by my staff are from Darwin, I probably should continue delivering really good stuff for people in Darwin, or I take the opposite tack and go, I need to be less Darwin oriented and more oriented on Brisbane, where there's a market that I'm expanding into. Or I really want to reach people in Sydney. I need to be much more successful at reaching people in Sydney. And the same with industries. We can see the top demographics of people you've reached. Construction features strongly in mind, marketing, advertising, government admin, IT, and not-for-profits all figure really high in the kind of people that I'm reaching with particular posts and particular activity on LinkedIn. That tells me then a bit of a breakdown of the kind of industries I need to speak to, the examples I give, for instance, during a social media post. If I'm talking to a social media post where I'm constantly talking about life coaches and energy healers, well, I'm not seeing life coaches and energy healers represented in my top lots of people I'm reaching. I need to use more examples for construction, marketing, government, IT, and not-for-profits. So that's where I learn how to better reach the people I'm doing. And it also tells me that these are the people who are most engaged with me and the most reached by me. They're probably the people I need to be reaching out to more. So apparently, construction, here I come.